Welcome to the Word for the Valley podcast. I'll be your host. My name is Jordan, and we're listening to sermons taken from Pastor Mike's in-depth teaching through the book of Matthew. Now, have you ever decided to submit yourself to something before you knew what it was and before you had all the information? Would you be willing to do whatever it takes in an effort to get to know God? Well, in this teaching, these wise men from the East are willing to do whatever it takes to worship the King of the Jews. Let's listen in as Pastor Mike teaches from chapter 2, verses 1 to 18.
So last week, in the last 2 weeks actually, in Matthew 1, we have seen the birth of Christ announced, and Joseph and Mary prepared for the arrival of Jesus. And so that kind of led up there to the end of Matthew 1, where Joseph agrees to marry Mary, to take her as his wife and raise this child that was produced in her through the virgin birth, the virgin conception, to take him then as his own, raise him then basically as a stepfather. Now you get into chapter 2, and it says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. So what's happening here is we're actually jumping forward about 2 years. I know it doesn't seem like that. There's a very small margin in the text. But we're actually flash forwarding about probably just less than 2 years from the end of Matthew chapter 1. And I'll explain why we know that as we go along. But what we don't get in the account is we don't get the accounts of Luke. What Luke gives us in the birth of Christ is Mary and Joseph traveling from Nazareth down to Bethlehem because there was a taxation and they needed to get to Bethlehem to be counted and taxed. We don't get that in Matthew. We don't get there was no room for them in the inn and that the baby had to be born in the caravanserai. We don't get that in Matthew. We don't get the fact that at 33 days then Mary and Joseph would have taken Jesus to Jerusalem, to the temple to be dedicated unto the Lord, and where they met Anna and Simeon and just this great prophecy that was spoken over them even at that particular time. And then it says in Luke that after the dedication of Jesus, they went to Nazareth. We're not told that here. Apparently they go to Nazareth. When Matthew picks up the story, they're back in Bethlehem. So we don't know why they went to Nazareth. We don't know what for. Probably it would make sense that they kind of left Nazareth quickly. They didn't anticipate staying in Bethlehem when they came for the taxation. That was just going to be a trip. They were going to come down here, do this kind of thing. When all that was done, they were going to go home and resume life and these kinds of things. Well, they get back to Nazareth and realize this is not where we're supposed to be, or the Lord hasn't told us to move on from Bethlehem yet, or whatever. And they end up going back down to Bethlehem, where you see in verse 11 of chapter 2, where it says that they have taken up abode in a house. They're not in the caravanserai anymore. They're not in the inn. This is not a short-term stay. They've rented or bought a house. And now they're basically setting up shop here in Bethlehem, apparently where they intend to live, at least as far as they can see into the future. They intend to live here and raise Jesus. It's in this context that the wise men come. And it says here in verse 1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, these wise men, literally magi or magos, M-A-G-O-S in the Greek. We get our English word magician from this. Sometimes it's translated sorcerers in the book of Acts. The root word is translated sorcery or sorcerers. It's the idea that they had some type of peculiar insight, some type of knowledge that might have bordered on the rational and might have bordered into the kind of like hyper super spiritual or maybe even occultic in some ways. They were probably astrologers, at least astronomers. We know that they understood the stars. And they kind of have a leaning in this, which is very interesting because before coming to Jesus, we don't get any inclination that they are true followers of Yahweh. They're not Jewish. They're living in the East. Their practices, probably by and large, based on what they're doing, are not particularly godly. Would never advise somebody to base their life's decisions or their upcoming vacation even on the stars necessarily, but this is what their propensity is to. This is what their life is about. But God intervenes in it remarkably. He steps into the middle of it and he uses it. It says, wise men here from the east came to Jerusalem. Now the scholars back and forth. Is East Arabia? Is it Babylon, Iraq? Is it further east? Are we looking like China? Are we looking further east than even that? We don't know. We don't know. What we know is that these are wise men, magi, magicians, sorcerers of some sort. These are wise men that have seen a sign in the sky that has made them travel probably a distance of, we would probably guess, at least 500 miles on foot to bring a gift to the one whom the star is indicating. That they're willing to respond to what they see. Right? They may not know a lot. We don't have any idea that they have a firm basis or understanding of the Old Testament, that they are ready for the Jewish Messiah. We don't have that idea. But they know something unique has happened. And they are willing to follow the light that they have been given, which is one of the great miracles in this whole scene, right? That God will in fact use anything, even bad things, for the sincere seeking heart. And he knows when the heart is sincere. And he knows when that heart is seeking. That God can communicate through all kinds of means that we would never. I mean, it's like in some like God speaking to them through a Ouija board. We would never advise that. Listen, you don't need any more extra contact with the demonic realm than you already have. Okay, you certainly don't want to invite voices and demons and demonic activity into your life by any means, by saying, come in here and basically control my fingers to get a message communicated. That's the last thing you want to do. We would never advise that. But can God use something like that to even spell out the name Jesus? It's exactly what he's doing here with the wise men. It's exactly what he's doing here. These wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. And they say, it says in verse 2, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Now they're looking for the King of the Jews, and they come to Jerusalem to find him, which is where you would guess you'd find a king, right? But the king they find there is not the king that they're looking for. So they say, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen, look, his star, right? When Jesus was born, he had his own star, and something happened in the sky, in the stars, the alignment, or a new star creation. We don't know exactly what this is. Some people try to connect it to different time periods and different things, looking back through where the stars of the planets would have aligned and would have taken a particular shape. We don't get any of that. Who knows, right? They saw something unique, and they connected it to something happening in Israel. And that's enough for them. For we have seen, look, his star in the east, out of the east is what that means. We've seen a star out of the east and have come, look here, to worship him. They've already made up their mind that whatever they find here, they will surrender to. Worship means surrender, means to bow in the dust. They don't know what they're going to find here. I get the idea that they're coming to look for a king. They anticipate him to be in a palace. They anticipate him to have power. They anticipate him to have whatever kind of influence in these kinds. And they're coming to worship him. I don't know that they're going to anticipate so much that they're going to see a 2-year-old boy in a house hanging behind his mom's leg. I don't know that that's exactly what they're anticipating when they're coming here. But whatever they find in connection to that star, they will worship it. That's where their heart is. And the sincerity and the desire and willingness to surrender to the truth before you even know what the truth is, in some ways, is the greatest prerequisite to being saved that there is in all of life. If you knew what the truth is, would you surrender to it? Well, listen, you have to surrender to it before you know what the truth is. That's how a seeking heart works. That's how God works. If you look to God and say, God, I want to know you with all my heart. I want to know you with my life, and I will do whatever you ask me to do. All you need to do is give me the information, and I will do it. God will lead you to himself. He will give you what you need so you can respond to him in the way that you want to. The problem is a lot of times when people come to the Lord, they want all of the information first, and then they want to gather all the information to decide whether or not it's really something that they want to do, right? So they want to get all the, do I have to do this? Do I have to do this? I mean, I can't do this and can't do this. And then they're trying to figure out whether or not the price of surrender is worth it. When you come to the Lord, you have to come pre-surrendered, as these guys do. They say, we have come to worship him. In verse 3, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now here we are in this scene, introduced to a man that we know as Herod the Great. Herod the Great, he's called the king 3 times in this passage, verse 1, verse 3, and verse 9. He is called the king. It's interesting, it's a juxtaposition, a contrast of kings in this chapter. And you have Herod the Great here, who in some ways has tried to be the king. He's not necessarily the king. He's not Caesar, right? He's got a big ruling area at this time. He's very influential. He's very powerful. He's also very short. History tells us he wasn't much more than 5 feet tall, right? In my mind, forgive me, I just picture Lord Farquaad from Shrek. Just this, he's obviously trying to compensate for something, right? And turn himself into some domineering world power. He's building big buildings and taking great power and killing people at his own whimsy and these kinds of things. All in an effort to be king. It's interesting. Herod the king. Herod who's trying to become the king. When he heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Caesar Augustus actually said that it was safer to be Herod's pig than it was to be Herod's son. He was more ready to kill his son than to kill his own pig. And that's kind of the history with this man. So when he gets troubled, all of the city gets troubled with him. Then verse 4 says, and when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. Now it seems as if the wise men have basically kind of hit a wall here. I don't know what happened to their star for a while, kind of thing. The star got them all the way from Babylon or Arabia, wherever they've come from the east, got them all the way to Jerusalem. And maybe it's day, maybe the stars, kind of thing, and they're in Jerusalem kind of waiting for the next revelation and next appearance and these kinds of things. Or maybe it's been a couple days since they've seen the star. And they're waiting and looking, and kind of Herod is kind of panicking. He says, hey, help us out. And where does he turn to? He turns to the religious leaders of the Jews. He turns to the scriptures. It's interesting. He's got no desire to surrender to the scriptures. He's just going to use the scriptures for his own benefit. He's going to use them for information. And he's going to try to use that information for his own benefit. It's interesting. He goes to the religious leaders, the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, and he inquired of them where the Christ, where the Messiah was to be born. And remarkably here in verse 5, so they, the religious leaders, said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd, the great work of Jesus, who will shepherd my people Israel. Here's a remarkable scene and telling through the rest of the Gospels that the religious leaders of Jesus' day, before he even came into his public ministry, knew that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. They knew that he would be born in Bethlehem, and they knew that Jesus was in fact born in Bethlehem. Now they will mock him over and over again for having grown up in Nazareth. They will say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? The general consensus of everybody during that particular time. But here, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and the religious leaders know it, and they don't respond to it. You had 3, we don't know how many wise men there are, by the way, 3 or 10 or 50 or 100. We don't know how many there are. It's very unlikely, by the way, that 3 wise men bearing gifts would make that trip all the way by themselves across the desert, right? That would make them, that's a target, right? That would make them very vulnerable to attack and hijack and thievery along the way. If it was only 3 of them, there's no way that gold gets all the way from the east to Jesus in Bethlehem. All right? So they probably have this escort. You have this whole group of individuals come into the city of Jerusalem. They get audience with Herod the Great. He comes to the religious leaders with a question. Hey, where's the Christ going to be born? And they say, hey, of course, Bethlehem of Judah. It's Micah. It's in the Bible. We know right where this is. Right? And when the wise men leave and that entourage and that group of people leave to continue on the journey to find the star and see that Christ, those religious leaders don't follow them. They don't go ahead to Bethlehem waiting for the arrival of these guys, asking them to lead them to their own Messiah, their own Christ. shows in some ways how little regard the religious have for Christ, while these Gentiles, these pagans from a far distant land, show much more reverence for their own Messiah than they do. This is remarkable. So they know he is going to be born in Bethlehem of Judah. Then verse 7 then says, Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, so he holds a council with them, he's got to get the religious leaders out of the way. He wants to make sure that he's in charge of this whole thing. He secretly calls in the wise men and determined, and it's literally, he determined specifically, like he asks and asks and asks to nail down specifically, like, are you sure? What month? What day? When? And he says, when that star in fact appeared. Determined from them what time the star appeared. Now in his mind, and it seems that it's true, in his mind, if he knows when the star came into the sky, he knows when the baby was born. This gives him an appropriate or approximate age of the child. All right, and we're going to find that Herod is going to kill all of the children in this area, all the boys, 2 years of age and younger. So the wise men, it seems, told him that that star appeared in the sky less than 2 years ago, which gives us an indication about how long this journey's been taking for them to get there. Probably a year's time at least, if not more. He determines secretly, quietly, what time this star appeared. And he sent them now. He gives them this message and this kind of sending off. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the young child, literally toddler, by the way. It's not an infant anymore. Again, he's at least a year old, probably less than 2 years old. Go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. Now, we don't know what kind of information these wise men had regarding Herod the Great. But soon as anybody who knew Herod the Great at all heard him say, I want to worship him, knew that he would be lying. Herod the Great didn't want to worship anybody except Herod the Great. There was nobody he was going to bow down to. He would kill anything in his way to make sure that he was the supreme. He was the king. But he gives them this offer. I'm going to worship him too. That's what the wise men said that they were going to do. So he says, that's what I'll do as well. But it's not that at all. He intends to kill this child. When they come back with the information about this is where Jesus is, the Christ is, Herod will send his soldiers down there and he will execute that baby. That's his plan. Now in verse 9, when they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star, which they had seen arising out of the east or in the east, went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. Now again, so many questions. I don't know. Was the star moving? Did it have a beam of light kind of shining down into Jerusalem? Or like did it shows up at some points, hides at other, what's going on with this goofy star? But here they are. They're told they're supposed to go to Bethlehem. And they say, okay, we're going to go to Bethlehem. They get out, go for a walk. And here the star comes back out again. And now it's leading them right down to the city and apparently to the house of where this child is being held, raised. And came and stood over where the young child was. And the wise men know. They know exactly what's happening. When they see the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Right? We don't know. Is it exceedingly great joy because they got to Jerusalem and then the star went out until they could talk to Herod? And now the star's back and they're like, hey, look, we're back on the road kind of thing. The GPS is working again. You know, kind of like, oh, look, it's a different type of satellite system, but it's nonetheless, it's efficient in getting them there, right? It's back on, guys. Look, we're back on the road. Here we go. Or did they finally realize that the star had stopped? And they're all like, thank God this trip is over. Like, it's the longest, because they don't know where this trip is going to end. When they set out to find the Christ, they didn't know where it was going to end. And they're like Abraham. They went to a place they knew not where. They went to a place not knowing where the conclusion of this all was. So many people in life, they want to know exactly how it's all going to play out before they make a decision for the Lord. I want to know if I'm going to have this, and am I going to have this? I mean, is he going to marry me, or are we going to have a family? Are we going to do this? Am I going to like my life? And you don't know any of that leading into it. It's not why you follow Jesus. You follow Jesus for Jesus. And some of us are going to like the life that he produces. And some of us may not like the life that he produces all that much. But I tell you what, it will be your best life possible. Because it ain't any better out there without him. And here they find him, find the star sitting over this house, and they come. It says in verse 11, when they had come into the house. Now, this is just one of those scenes I just love imagining. I can sit with it for a while, right? You have at least 3 men. And let's say there's 25. That's probably a low number for this entourage, right? Camels, horses, donkeys, food, provisions, water that they would travel and carry it with them across the desert. They're not waiting for to find a well in Arabia to get here, kind of thing. Somewhere in their saddlebags, they got gold, frankincense, and myrrh as well, probably hidden away good, so nobody in their entourage even knows where it's at. They've met Herod in Jerusalem. The city has heard about it. There's starting to be a stir about these guys. And they get down here to Bethlehem, which is only about a 5-mile journey. Jerusalem is just 5 miles north of Bethlehem, so they've gone to the south here about 5 miles. And they knock on the door of a house. Sometimes it's a little unnerving. Somebody knocks on the door of your house. I don't know if you peek out the window and see, like, uh-oh, who's here? I didn't expect anybody. Do I like them? Am I home? You're trying to figure all this out at the same time, right? And they knock on the door. Joseph, maybe, goes to the door. Does he peek out the window? Look through the glass, pulls back the curtain. By the way, when you do that, everybody knows. You are home. They know it at that point. The curtain, hey, look, the curtain moved. They're in there watching us, kind of thing. I just wave, yo, I'm here, kind of thing. Or you don't want me, just whatever. But it's the way it goes. And they see these guys. I mean, does Joseph look at Mary and say, hey, yo, we got some guests. Yo, Mary, guess what? The kings of the East. These guys, no doubt, adorned. You don't make this journey if you're a slave. You don't make this journey if you're poor. It's only a wealthy individual that can make this journey. And the freedom to be able to do it and to leave work for this long, to be able to get here, right? Again, the gifts that they're bringing, obviously. Yo, Mary, where's Jesus right now? And do they gather together in this room as these men, at least 3 of them now, kind of step into the house and stand face to face? You have 3 magi. And then you have Joseph, Mary, and Jesus on the other side of the room, face to face. Be an interesting encounter. It says they came into the house. They saw the young child, that's Jesus, with Mary as mother. So this apparently is what happens right off the bat here. Again, Jesus is less than 2, okay? If you haven't been around a 15-month-old recently, you need to spend some time in the toddler room, right? Because they're weird. They just are. They look like humans, but they're not. Not yet. They'll grow into it eventually, right? I mean, they have their own universe. They have their own thought process. They have their own emotions. They have their own. I mean, they're whatever. They're fun until they're not. Right? Toddlers are fun until they're not, and then they're really not fun. They're either one or the other. And but here you have this little child. The wise men come in and be like, hey, there was a star, and we're looking for the Christ and the King of the Jews. And Joseph is like, it's not me. And Mary's like, sir, I'm not no king. And they look at him. The guy's like, let's go home. What do we do? This is a long trip to see this. Kind of thing. And the little Jesus, right? Toddlers. I mean, are they particularly well-behaved? Not many that I've known, right? Again, they have their own mind. Very little minds. They have their own mind. And to see these strange men, it would not be out of sorts in some ways for little Jesus to kind of tuck in behind mom's leg. Just kind of hang off of mom. And it clearly, right? The young child with Mary, his mother. He doesn't run to Joseph. He's probably too close to the door. He's hanging back here with Mary. Remarkably, immediately, these guys, to the testament of their heart, the sincerity of their heart, says that they fell down and worshipped him. They actually bowed before this little boy.
All right, we learned that when these wise men finally did meet this King of the Jews, they weren't disappointed because they came pre-surrendered ahead of time. So, can we come to God pre-surrendered? Do we have expectations of him? And how do we respond to his kingship? Well, stay connected and listen to Pastor Mike finish his sermon on this section. This is the Word for the Valley podcast. So long, everyone.